about myself before we get into the talk. My name is Sangeeta Nori. I come from a city in India, Hyderabad. It's in South India. And my career journey for IT is fairly, standard. I started out, studied computer engineering in school, and then I started working as a C++ developer about 20 odd years ago in Atlanta at a telecom company. A year and a half into the telecom company, one of my colleagues, went to a startup and said, "Hey, do you want to come join me in the startup?" I said, "Why not?" Well, unfortunately, that was bad timing. It was the dot-com bust of 2000, 2001, and a couple months into that startup, I got laid off. Well, then I got a job at another startup, got laid off from there. So it was 2 layoffs back to back in a span of 6 months. And you can imagine how rough that would have been for someone early in their career. Stuck through it, used the downtime to learn Java, got myself certified, went back working as a backend Java developer, building enterprise applications on WebLogic, WebSphere, for several companies. This was the pre-cloud days. And then when cloud came along, I switched to building full-stack applications for the cloud. Along the way, I moved up from a mid-level engineer to a senior engineer tech lead. And then last couple years, I've been doing engineering management. So currently, I'm a senior engineering manager at Nordstrom, #Nerdstrom. And you may not know, but we do have a tech hub in Atlanta. So we are hiring. There's a couple positions full-time, as well as looking for interns for summer. So with that plug for Nordstrom, let's get in. So the title for this talk, Engineering plus Management is not engineering management. It was actually inspired by my experience of being a new engineering manager when I realized that this job is so much more than these 2 words lead you to believe, right? So how do I think of engineering management? I think of it as a pie with 3 pieces. There's, of course, the engineering piece. And for someone coming from tech, that's probably the easiest, covers all the technical aspects of things. And then there's the management side, which is your business objectives, business outcomes. And you're dealing with things like OKRs and KPIs. You're partnering with your stakeholders and building roadmaps. You're learning how to do project delivery, time and resource management, right? Stuff that you probably would learn in a typical business management or project management course. And for somebody that's coming from tech, that was not something that came to me easy, but I could learn it. It wasn't, challenging. And then there's the third part. In my opinion, that's the most important part, which is, of course, the people management side of things, right? And we all know anything to do with people is just automatically complex. It is unpredictable, messy, and sometimes, just you got to power through it. And why is that? Why is this third piece so challenging? Couple reasons. Look at this first bullet point, foster a great team culture. It's hard to define, and it's even hard to measure progress, right? Or even psychological safety. It's part of every manager's job description. But if I were to ask you today, how great is the culture on your team? How psychologically safe is your team? Or is your team have better culture now than it had a year ago? I mean, we all would struggle to answer those questions, right? It's hard to define, hard to measure. The second reason is that there is no playbook. There are no standard recipes that you can pull from and say, okay, I'm going to use these to solve these problems, right? Like energize and motivate your team. What works for one engineer at one time doesn't work for another engineer, right? Like even for the same engineer, it doesn't work at another time. So there's no recipes that you can pull from. As if that's not enough, here's the kicker, right? The first 2 pieces, you can lean on your colleagues and your peers for help. Like if you're stuck on the technical aspects, you can lean on your tech lead or your senior engineer and ask for help. On the management side, you can lean on maybe your project manager or your product manager and get some inputs. But this third one, it's all on you. I can't ask my colleague to come fix the culture on my team. I can't ask another engineering manager to come do the performance evaluations or resolve conflicts for people on my team. That's on me. And this sole responsibility, being responsible for it yourself, that can feel like a big mental load, a burden on someone that's new, right? And can be quite nerve-wracking. So if everything I'm saying about this third piece makes engineering management sound scary, that's not my intent, right? I want folks to know that there's some unpredictable elements in this job and just walk into it knowing it. And that might be something you enjoy. You may enjoy the challenge, right? And that may be the right thing for you, but it's good to know about it before you step in. This quote kind of sums it up for me, right? I love this shirt for myself. I'm an engineering manager. I solve problems you don't know you have in ways you can't understand. And sometimes there's an extension. Sometimes I don't know what problems I'm going to be up against, and I got to figure it out on the fly. Well, so for the rest of this talk, what I want to do is share some insights from my experience of moving into engineering management, and also some insights that I gathered from talking to other managers and leaders in my network. So if you're one of those, you know who you are. Thank you for taking the time. Now, 2 disclaimers before I get started with the talk. One, the experiences I share come from, obviously they're my experiences coming from tech into engineering management. And they may not resonate for someone that's coming to it from a different direction. So there may be a bit of a tech bias in today's talk. And 2, I'm going to be talking more about things that I had to unlearn than things that I had to learn. Because it's harder to unlearn things. You have to apply a forcing function to them, right? You have to reprogram that muscle memory. And in fact, some of these things that you have to unlearn, they are counterintuitive, right? Because they go against your established beliefs or norms from a while. So that's why it's harder. So that's what I'm going to focus on for this talk. So let's start with 2 such rules that you may have heard from when you were kids that I'm going to ask you to break in management. Maybe not break, tweak them, think about them differently, right? So the first rule is treat everyone equally, right? No favorites. Treat all people equally. This one I personally care about because in my 20-plus career, I've sadly seen more than one managers that have played favorites. Maybe you all can think of one too, right? And it's quite some years ago, and this person took it to quite an extreme, did it quite openly. I don't recall all the details, but I remember how that made me feel. I was not his favorite, if you can tell. Right? And to quote Maya Angelou, you may forget what people said or did, but you never forget how people made you feel, good or bad, right? So at that time, I thought to myself, if I were to become an engineering manager, I'm going to treat everyone equally on my team, no favorites. But the way I think about this rule and the way that I have applied it has evolved over time, right? For example, one-on-ones with my team members, right? Maybe there's a junior person or someone who's new to my team that needs an hour of my time every week, one-on-one. And maybe there's a senior, seasoned engineer who prefers ad hoc meetings or maybe wants to talk an hour every other week. So the point is give equal access to your time, but it doesn't have to be equal time, right? Another example, let's say you're the manager and you're sending your team, you're thinking of sending them to a conference like this. If you were to apply the rule, treat everyone equally, you would either send them all or send none. But what if there's folks on your team whose personality is such that they would enjoy being at a conference like this, thrive, learn a lot? And maybe there's someone else who would much rather, use those resources to get a subscription for a learning platform. So the point here is equal access to resources, but you treat them, the way they want to be treated. The next rule, the golden rule that again we've all heard about since childhood, is treat others the way you want to be treated. The problem with this rule is that it maps your preferences onto your team, right? If my personality is such that I like receiving my feedback instantly, or I like getting recognition publicly, that may not be the way that everyone on my team wants it. So when you become a manager of a team, new, experienced, when you are inheriting or getting a team, please take the time to meet with each and every one on your team individually, learn their preferences, learn what motivates them and what drives them, and treat them the way they want to be treated, right? Next, I'm going to, what's that? Okay, absolutely. I'm going to update that. Thank you for that. Next, I'm going to talk about some new manager traps, and God knows I've fallen into a lot of them. The first one, doing your team's work. Now, this one, I think people coming from the tech side into management are more prone to it, because typically they would have progressed from being a junior to a mid-level to a senior engineer. And in that path, they keep doing more of what they were doing before, right? And they're just scaling themselves. They're solving problems of greater magnitude, greater complexity. But when they switch from a senior engineer to an engineering manager role, they forget that they're actually switching lanes. It's a completely different role, different goals, right? And so I've seen managers who continue to do the work rather than enable their team and manage the work. And why does that happen? Two reasons mostly. One, old habits die hard, right? Old habits are comfortable. And two, there's this notion that being a hands-on technical manager is good for the role. Like being hands-on in the role makes you more successful. Nothing wrong with that. Be hands-on, but set the appropriate boundaries. And I've been there, I've made that mistake of not setting the right boundaries when I was a new manager. I would volunteer to code some key features, never have time for it, try to squeeze time between meetings, evenings, weekends. Of course, my work-life balance took a hit, but that was not the only damage. It actually hurt the team. Because what would happen is, since I didn't have enough time to take it through and through, I would ask for help from my team. I would tap on an engineer's shoulder and say, hey, can you write the unit test for me, integration test? Can you do the DevOps? Can you support UAT for this feature for me? And that was just wrong. It was a burden to the team, not a blessing. And it's really interesting how I realized I was not doing the right thing, right? It was some really powerful, subtle but powerful feedback I got from my tech lead. She comes to me and she says, Sangeeta, me and a couple team members, we are wondering, how do you handle all of it, right? How do you manage coding and the management stuff? How do you do it all? And at the time, I felt good. I was like, this feels like a compliment. I do it all, don't I? How do I do that, right? It took me a bit, but I eventually realized what she was trying to tell me. Don't do it all, right? Don't do it all. So figure out a way to enable your team. Don't do your team's work. Being friendly versus being a friend. So any of you that have been an engineering manager, you probably recall the very first time you're getting the results of an anonymous feedback from your team. Most workplaces have this where the teams rate their managers anonymously. I remember how nervous I was the very first time, right? Is my score going to be high enough? Does my team love me enough? More than my peers' team loves them? I mean, it's not a popularity contest, but it just felt like one, right? And the reason for that is we are insecure. New managers are insecure. And we need validation. We need validation that we are doing our job right. And this score from these anonymous surveys feels like a good proxy of knowing that we are doing our job right. And in order to preserve or boost that score, we tend to being friendly with our team. And the problem is we shy away from having tough conversations and giving that constructive, tough feedback, right? Because what if I tell them they're not doing their job right? They're gonna, give me a nasty score. No, don't want to do that. But here's the counterintuitive thing. Most people would rather know when they have things that they need to improve. They would rather know when they have to change some behavior of theirs than not, as long as that feedback is given in a constructive way. So don't shy away from those tough conversations. Figure out how you can be their friend, and don't just stop at being friendly, right? So every team has its mix of A, B, and C players, right? Adam Grant, in one of his popular TED Talks, calls them the givers, the matchers, and the takers. Your A players are typically your most motivated, most skilled people. They reliably get the job done quickly. They are the mentors on the team, so their net is a give to the team. And when you are a project manager, program manager, or a tech lead, you are focused on delivery. You're constantly optimizing for delivery. You have to hit those deadlines. And so the tendency is to give the most important tasks to your A players. But then when you become an engineering manager, your goal is different now. Your goal is now to enable your team and build redundancy across your team. You have to spread the knowledge across your team. What does that mean? You have to help your C players become B players and B become A players by giving them a stretch assignment, a challenging task. That takes time. Sadly, the other trap I see a lot here is the just this one time trap, right? Oh, just this one deadline is supremely important. I'm going to go to my A players this one time. Let me tell you, there is no good, well-behaved deadline that's going to be generous on you ever and say, take the time. You just have to make it a priority and make it happen. As we progress in our careers from a junior to a senior person, especially in engineering, we are all constantly given the advice, we are coached, speak up more, be bold, bring forth your ideas, lead discussions, give a talk, make a presentation, right? So you're constantly dialing up your speaking gene as you progress in your career. Guess what? When you switch to an engineering manager role, you've got to dial down on the speaking so that you can dial up on the listening, because active listening is a key enabler for success in your new role. Sadly, I see a lot of managers dominating the conversations on their teams. And this is bad for two reasons. One, when a manager speaks up first and offers a solution or proposes an idea, the rest of the team tends to not counter it, right? So by speaking up first, they don't know it, but they are inadvertently suppressing the conversation on the team. And two, it's bad because if the manager is doing all the talking, where do they have time to do the listening? So it's bad for both those reasons. And so try to figure out how you can speak less. And when you do speak as a manager, I encourage you to ask insightful questions instead, right? Lead your team to a solution. But if you do find yourself in a position where you have to offer the solution or offer an opinion, please remember to allow your team to go first. You go last. Now, there's one important exception to this rule where the managers have to speak up first, and I'm going to talk about it on the next slide. The last thing I see a lot of new managers falling into is this feeling that compels them to do everything, right? Suddenly, you're in a new management role. You're going to get a lot of emails. You're going to be copied on a lot of emails. You're going to get a lot of meeting invites, and you feel like you have to be in every meeting, catch up on all the emails, read up on all the Slacks. Do that if you're new to the team or new to the company and you need to build yourself that context. But over time, it's important that you figure out what is truly important. Otherwise, you're going to be lost in the minutiae, in the detail, and you're going to miss something important. So figure out for yourself how you're going to do that. Next, let's talk about building a great team culture. Culture is such an important attribute for a workplace, right? No one wants to work for a company or a team that has poor culture. So let's start out by defining culture, right? If you Google for it, the most common definition is that it is a set of values, beliefs, and attributes that an organization holds important and the employee behaviors that it translates into. Okay, that was easy. How do you define a great team culture? This one's harder. And the best definition that I found came from a leader at Nordstrom, and I quote him, who said, "Great team culture is that which enables team success while keeping people personally attached to the purpose, to the vision, and to each other." Right? And I've kind of highlighted the points which I want to emphasize. Personally attached and keeping team members attached to each other. So the building blocks of a great team culture are strong bonds, strong interactions between our team members. And these are important both at a macro and a micro level, right? At an org level and at a team level. And I believe we engineering managers are the stewards of culture at a team level, at the micro level. And like any good steward, it's important that we as the manager first clearly understand, and then we clearly define and embody the culture that we want to build for our team. So what does that mean? As a manager, you have to observe the interactions between your team members, and then you have to reward and encourage those behaviors that improve the team interactions and gets you to a better culture, and then you have to tackle the ones that are causing a poor culture. Okay, how do I do that day to day? Well, I urge that if you're an engineering manager, be in the meetings where your team is getting its work done. Be in the meetings where they are brainstorming. Be in the design review, in the code review, in the escalations. I mean, most managers are on escalation calls, right? Like priorities, importance, but maybe the managers can't make time for the others. And now, you may ask, well, you just told me don't get caught up in everything. You told me to prioritize, then how am I going to attend all these meetings? Absolutely right. So that's where it becomes important that you build for yourself a network of trusted team members who can be in those meetings and who are bold enough to come back to you and tell you when an intervention is needed. These are your canaries, your network of canaries. And the more senior you are in management and leadership, the more important it is for you that you build yourself that network of canaries who can tell you how things are going. Next, I'm going to talk about some specific things that I encourage everyone to do if you're a manager, and some things that I've done with my team. The first is to build a blameless culture. We have to normalize failure. We live in a world which celebrates success constantly, and failure is rarely talked about, right? It's usually shoved under the rug. Even in our workplaces, right, our systems, if you think about it, our performance evaluation system is not very forgiving of failure. How many times have you seen an individual get promoted when they tried really hard at something and yet they failed? So how then are you going to give the confidence to your team that it's okay to take risks? It's okay to make mistakes? Well, you have to talk about it. You have to talk about your mistakes. Reed Hastings, Netflix CEO, in his book, if you've read it, No Rules, Rules, he has this line. He says, whisper your wins, shout your mistakes. Whisper your wins, shout your mistakes, and I think it's really important for managers and leaders to do that publicly. But it goes against our human instinct of self-preservation, right? Like, it's hard to stand up in front of people and admit that I made a mistake. So how do you help your team do that? Well, as a manager, you have to build a process for it. On my team, at the end of every sprint, just the engineers get together and talk about the goals that we missed in that sprint. And we double-click, zoom in, and say, why did we miss our goals? What were the lapses in judgment? What were the mistakes we made? Did we try something that didn't work? What are the lessons learned? It goes beyond a standard sprint retrospective, right? And at first, your team may not warm up to the idea. So as a leader, you have to build that safe space, be the example, and trust me, your team's gonna, over time, warm up to the idea and start to benefit from it if you create that space for them. Harvard researcher coined the term psychological safety and defined it as the belief that you will not be punished or humiliated when you ask a question, raise a concern, put forth an idea, and that your team is a safe space for risks and to do experiments. How do I promote psychological safety on my team? Well, you have to look at the way that feedback is given between your team members. And when I say feedback, I don't mean the anonymous feedback that most companies have you do at once or twice a year during performance evaluation time. I'm not talking about that performance feedback. I'm talking about the written feedback that your engineers give each other during code reviews, right? The code review comments. I'm talking about the verbal feedback that your engineers give each other during a brainstorm or a design review. So when you're in those meetings or when you're reading the code review comments as a manager, if you find that something is insensitive, you have to coach your team to build the etiquette of how feedback is given, right? As an example, if you find an engineer saying, oh, this design idea, this is surely going to fail. This feels like a junior person did it. Or if a code review comment goes, it's obvious to everyone you should have used a set here, why are you using a list? These make the person who's receiving feedback feel that somehow they don't belong, that they're not meeting the bar, that they're not qualified. It's amazing how you make the feedback less personal, how much better the people take it. So as the manager, you've got to watch how feedback is being given and raise the etiquette as needed. Now, one trap here, one thing I've seen on some teams is that your superstar engineers, like the most senior ones that have been there, done that, they've earned a reputation, they somehow get a pass on good behavior, right? It's like they don't have time to be nice. They've got all the answers, they're doing all the work, they're mentoring the team, give them a break. Well, guess what? This is one area where as a manager, you have to treat everyone equally. No one gets a pass on, niceties. Everyone has to follow the etiquette. I'm not a fan of this word microaggressions because the micro in it, right, makes you think that the impact of these aggressions is somehow small, it doesn't matter, right? But the thing is, the cumulative impact of these microaggressions over time on the person that's at the receiving end is not micro at all, right? The aggressions may be subtle, but the impact is not. As a woman in tech, I've endured my share of microaggressions. And even early on in my career, right, when I did not know or understand the word, I didn't know that that was what it was, but I know how that made me feel. Like when I was a mid-level engineer and maybe I wanted to take a stretch assignment, I put my hand up for something I've never done before, something complex, and the team lead tells me, "You've never done this before. Are you sure you want to do this, or can you do this? Do you think you can manage it all? Do you need help?" The problem with this kind of microaggression is that it comes wrapped in a nice supportive envelope, right? They're asking you for help. But guess what? Didn't make me feel good. Made me feel like I was not ready, I was not prepared. So the best antidote to microaggressions is tackling your unconscious biases, because they are at the root of most microaggressions. You just automatically assume I can do my job, right? So as a manager, you have an opportunity to talk one-on-one with everyone on your team. You have an opportunity to figure out if someone has these biases, and you have an opportunity to coach your team and help them get past it. And that's how you tackle them. Last thing I want to talk about is using the wrong incentives. There are enough studies that show that bad incentives, not only do they not get you to the outcomes that you want, they actually backfire on you. They undermine performance. They actually lead to poorer results, right? Think about it. I'm the engineering manager. I define what success looks like on my team. And if I say that I'm going to measure developer productivity by the number of lines of code they write, by the number of commits they make, or if I say I'm going to measure the quality of code on my team by the number of unit tests they're going to write, guess what's going to happen? Right? I'm going to basically build an unhealthy competitive culture on my team where everyone on my team is trying to game the system and win for all the wrong reasons. So as a leader, it's really important that you watch what type of incentives you are setting on a team. Because believe it or not only do you not get the results, it's damaging the culture, right? So definitely pay attention to that. Next, I want to jump into career growth and development. It's probably one of the important things that we do for our team members. In the book, Radical Candor, by the way, if you haven't read the book and you're a manager, for everyone, it's a great book, recommend. So in the book, Radical Candor, the author Kim Scott writes about a leader at Apple who talks about two types of people on teams, the rock stars and the superstars. Rock stars are the people who are content with where they are and what they're doing. They're happy with the work they have. They're usually dependable, reliable, like a rock, hence rock stars. The superstars, on the other hand, need to be constantly challenged. They want the exciting new thing. They're going to put their hand up for the new project, for the shiny new technology. They want to go places constantly. As a manager, you have to recognize that there's a place for rock stars and there's a place for superstars, right? Unfortunately, I've seen some management teams where they judge the rock stars. Just because they want to be on the same team and do the same kind of work doesn't mean that they are lacking in ambition, right? Doesn't mean that they are disengaged. Don't misconstrue that as being disengaged. They're just happy. And if you try to push your rock stars into becoming superstars, and if you do that real hard, you're just going to push them away. So recognize that everyone on your team is on their own journey in terms of career growth and development, and they want to go at it at their own pace. And promotion does not always equals growth, right? You can be growing in other ways. So please recognize what each of your team members wants and support them the way they want to be supported. And I said promotion is not the only way to grow. Now I'm going to talk about some promotion traps. And the most common one I've seen, at least for engineering managers, is that they get promoted from a senior engineer or a tech lead into a management role only because there wasn't a viable path in their organization to stay technical and grow. I've seen quite a few of these. They're not ready for management, but that's just what the natural next step was. Fortunately, I think that trend we're making lots of progress on. A lot of companies are now defining that technical career path, which is great. I hope you are in one of those companies where you don't have to choose. But pushing people into management is damaging for two reasons. One is, of course, you're doing a disservice to them, but the bigger disservice is you're doing a disservice to the team, right? It's impacting a lot more people. The other promotion trap that I've seen is promoting people too quickly, usually because the organization needs it and it's not based on the readiness of the person. And I've seen this happen on teams where they're growing quickly, like a hyper growth company, or like suddenly you've got budget, you can hire a lot more people. Awesome, you're getting new people on a weekly, monthly basis. Now you need seasoned people who can mentor your new folks. You need managers to lead the team. And how are you going to fill the gap? Brainwave, let's promote from within. So you're going to ask your engineer who's been on the project for a year, hey, can you be the lead on this project? And you're going to tap on the shoulder of the person who's been leading the project for 6 months and say, can you become a manager? And the operating assumption here is that let's give people challenges, let's give them stretch assignments, they're going to figure it out. But the problem is that doesn't work for leadership and management always, because that is something like we've seen in the early part of the talk, is something that you need to be prepared for. So don't push people into it if they're not ready just because it's the right thing for the org. The last thing I want to talk about in this section is some blind spots when it comes to performance evaluation. And performance evaluation is one of the most important things that you as a manager do for your team. It has direct consequences for them. So the first blind spot is, we are all in IT mostly data-driven people. We like our metrics. We like things we can see. And so there's a tendency to look at, when you're measuring developer productivity, to look at things like how many features have they delivered, how many story points, or whatever metric you have, right? And then you compare the two engineers, they delivered 6 stories versus 5. But what if the engineer who delivered 5 stories was a great mentor and helped 5 other engineers deliver their stories? That's not obvious to the manager unless you as the manager scout for that information and go get it from them. So you have to talk to your team and know that this person contributed in ways that are not reflected in the metrics, right? So take the time. And the second common thing that I've seen, blind spot, we all make plans and stories, we're going to do this and this, but every engineer gets tapped on their shoulder, ad hoc, unplanned work, right? Some other team needs help, some other engineer needs help. They pause what they're doing, they turn around, help that other person. But guess what? They're not going to remember it. When they're writing their review in November, they're not going to remember what they did in February and June. And it's not documented, so the manager doesn't know, right? So I encourage all my team members to keep a record of their accomplishments through the year, right? Call it a brag sheet, dev journal, whatever. But please encourage them to do that so that come performance evaluation time, all that undocumented ad hoc work gets counted into your evaluation. And the last thing I want to say here for blind spots is, remember that not all of us are English majors. We are all not going to be able to write an eloquent paragraph and describe in engaging terms the work we did over the year, right? So as a manager, try to look past that flowery language, try to look at the actual accomplishments objectively and evaluate your team.
That goes the other way around. I was an English major. My manager, I had to deal with all of my flowery language to find the accomplishments.
Yeah, yeah. No, both
He's
ways.
complain about that, yeah.
No, it's good. If you can write well, that's great, but just the writing should not, you should not be hung up on just the writing. So to conclude this talk, I'm going to talk about 2 more rules that I'm going to encourage you to break, right? As a manager. The first thing is, you can do anything you set your mind to. That's an awesome quote to live by in general. But as a manager, recognize when someone on your team is hitting a wall and is reaching limits and are not able to perform, right? And that happens in spite of all the training, support, mentoring, every effort that they've put in. The skills that a job requires just may not be a match for a person's talents. And when you as a manager recognize that fundamental mismatch, you've got to talk to the person, have that conversation, and nudge them into something else. Maybe there's another role in your organization and they can be awesome at it, but this just is not the right role. And the trap I see managers falling into here often is, let me give them a couple more weeks, couple more months, right? Like, it's obvious to you. You know that they are not able to handle the work, and yet you are giving them more time and more time. And it happens usually because the manager themselves is finding it hard to muster the courage to have the conversation. But remember, you're not just putting that person in a difficult position. You are actually doing a disservice to your team. So when you recognize that, have that conversation and help the person find something else to do. And the last rule is this notion that some work teams have, that they are a work family, right? And that's awesome. I want all teams to think of themselves as a family, to have that kind of strong connections. But at the end of the day, you have to realize that these connections, this team exists for a reason, and it is to achieve business outcomes. And in order to achieve great outcomes, you need the best person in each role on your team. So again, going back to Reed Hastings, Netflix CEO, he actually said, think of your work teams as a professional sports team, right? The right person in every single role. And honestly, this has been a North Star for me, and it has really helped me. I remind myself of this rule because every time I hesitate to have a tough conversation with someone, this rule kind of reminds me that while the individuals on your team are important, what's more important are the connections and the overall success, the overall ability of your team to achieve its outcomes and goals. So that's your number one job responsibility, and this rule kind of helps me keep that in focus. So that's all I have. None of the things I share are new or groundbreaking, but I found that it's really hard. It's one thing to just know them. It's another thing to kind of practice it every single day with every single team member you have. That's the hard part, right? Good luck. Well, thank you all so much for coming. And thank you. This is the first time I'm giving this particular talk. I would love to hear your feedback. Please tell me what you loved about it, how I can improve it. You can tweet at Nori Sangeeta. Also, I'm here at the conference rest of the day today and tomorrow. So if you want to give me feedback in person, I welcome that as well. Thank you. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, I have one. So how do you handle the normalizing failure, allowing people to stretch, as well as coming in and realizing when someone isn't going to be able to grow, right? So on one hand, you're saying that you're going to give people the opportunity to fail and to acknowledge that this might be something they need to learn. But on the other hand, looking at it and saying, well, this might not be your area, and allowing that to go too long. And letting the team know that you can fail, but at the same time saying, well, if you do fail, something's going to happen.
Great question, right? And so the question was, how do you reconcile between allowing people to make mistakes and recognizing when they are not able to learn anymore, right? And the trick there, if I had to answer in one sentence, is, are they making new mistakes or the same mistakes over and over again, right? I mean, you're allowed to make new mistakes. You learn new things, you don't know stuff, you figure out. So to me, the way I evaluate that is, if I've given feedback and asked them to improve on something, and I don't see improvement on that particular thing, and I have to give them the same feedback again and again and again, that's a red flag. But if I'm telling them to, improve in new ways, that's not a red flag for me.
Yeah, rule of thumb I have is 1 time's a learning lesson and 2 times is a habit. So,
yeah, well said.
By the way, I like your hat.
Well, I do recognize, I suppose like the microcosm, like the effect that you can have on your team's culture immediately with the engineers that you work with directly. How do you reconcile that with the impact that your regional or your director or people, a product manager you might work with have on your team as well, because they will also have a very real impact on your team's culture? And how do you respect their wishes while also trying to advocate for your team and how they run things?
Absolutely. So I'll touch on 2 things. One is just the overall culture at an org level, right? For that, you have to partner with your peer engineering managers, and if something's working on your team and something else is working on their team, so maybe you collaborate and bring it across the org. Now, specifically, your second point was, what if there's a stakeholder or a partner who is having an adverse impact or slowing your team down? Well, in that case, as the manager, hopefully your team feels safe enough to come tell you as the manager that they are having a particular challenge. And my first rule of thumb is, I don't step in for the team member. First, I'm going to give them ideas of how they can tackle it themselves, right? Because maybe the other person is doing it unconsciously. It could be one of those microaggression things, right? Like they don't even know they're doing it. So you have to recognize what type of issue that is, what bucket it falls under, right? And then equip your engineer to handle it. Now, if they need help at that point, you step in. You have to draw the boundaries. And at the end of the day, there's always disagreement, right? I think this is how something should be done. I think this is the right way. My stakeholder partner doesn't think that. Well, in that case, you have to go to someone more senior who can resolve that for you, right? At some point, you have to take it one level up. Or nowadays, a lot of orgs are doing the inverted pyramid, right? The management at the bottom. So you have to take it down to the lower level and see if they can support you and resolve your conflict.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, good question.
So I'm a new manager, and I feel like everything here is like coach your engineers, but then I feel very useless.
Great point. Yes, great point. That is one of the biggest insecurities for new managers, right? Because up until that point, especially if you've been an engineer, you can kind of see your work. You can see your impact, your contributions. I solved this bug today. How do you tell yourself that you've had a productive day as a manager or as a leader? Well, you have to redraw the success definition that you have, right? To me, if I've had 3 one-on-ones, right, and maybe in one of the one-on-ones it was just casual talk, nothing much, but in the other one-on-one, someone told me they had an issue and I gave them some ideas to solve the problem. That's a win in my book, right? So you have to redraw that success definition for yourself and maybe even list it out, right? Like helping other people solve problems. Sometimes it could be technical in nature. Like I've had an engineer who was struggling between 2 choices that they wanted to make and they were not sure which way to go. In a one-on-one they brought up, we had like a mini brainstorm session and I helped them decide which way they want to go. That's a win in your book for that day, right? So you have to redraw that success definition, and all these little things count. So the picture that I had where, you know, the engineering management, you had the pie with engineering management and the people side. So one thing you can do is, what does success look like in each of those 3 pieces? And I guarantee you, at least one of those you would have had a meeting or some kind of interaction that day where you made a contribution in one of those 3 areas. It's not always technical. It's not always business, not always people. You bounce between the 3. Cool. Well, thank you, everybody. Hope you have a great rest of your conference.